So I'm lying in my bed this morning because often when we talk about showing love to people through physical touch, people immediately start thinking about sex and marriage and all the romantic ways people show love. But that's only a small part of the picture. This love language of physical touch is about belonging and acceptance. This is the love language of physical touch. If you wanted to communicate love to someone, how would you do it? See, there's a lot of different ways to communicate love, and the better we are at each of those, the stronger our relationships are. That's the big idea of Dr. Gary Chapman's book, The 5 Love Languages. He says that everyone has a preferred way to receive love and express love. He calls those love languages and says that there are 5, and we've been exploring all of them. Words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and today, physical touch. If we want to communicate love with each other and to the important people in our lives, we need to become multilingual in speaking love. We need to learn people's love languages. In fact, we need to learn each of the 5 languages well enough to love anyone that God puts in our life. Physical touch is the love language that maybe seems the most straightforward. Hugs, kisses, holding hands. These things are what we do to people that we love, people we care for. See, a rub of the shoulder or a pat on the back are ways we show care through physical touch. And especially since the beginning of this COVID pandemic, some of us maybe didn't even realize how much we would have missed hugging a loved one. But now we are encouraged to be distant from those outside of our social bubble. So what does Jesus teach about showing care through physical touch? And how do we navigate this in a time in life when people are fearful of being close? Jesus often showed love and care through physical touch. There's actually numerous stories where he touches or embraces a person or they touch him. Let's look at just one of those stories to understand the importance of touch, and it kind of is relevant for today. It's found in the disciple Matthew's writings in chapter 8, verse 1 to 4, and here's what it says. Now when Jesus had come down from the mountain, large crowds followed him. A man with a skin disease, it was called leprosy, came and kneeled before him and said, Lord, if you want, you can make me clean. Jesus reached out his hand and touched him, saying, I do want to. Become clean. Instantly his skin disease was cleansed, and Jesus said to him, Don't say anything to anyone. Instead, go and show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded. This will be a testimony to them. You see, because leprosy was thought to be highly contagious, lepers were forbidden to touch others or to be touched. Sound familiar? If a leper came near a healthy person, he had to cover his face and cry, unclean, as a warning to others to stay away. You know, that's kind of how I feel every time I'm out in public and I start coughing, that people will yell at me, cover that guy's face, unclean. No touch at all. So when this poor man came and knelt before Jesus, he had probably not been touched by healthy hands in months or years. No touch at all. Then Jesus reached out his hand and touched this man. Why did Jesus touch this person who was untouchable by society? It wasn't to heal him, because Jesus could have done that without touching him. There are other stories where Jesus merely said the word and a person was healed. They didn't even have to be around him. So why did Jesus touch him? Because the man needed to be touched. I think Jesus knew that this man not only wanted to be healed, but to be loved. And he experienced love through touch. Jesus gave this man something no one else was willing to give him, a physical touch. Jesus took social and physical risks to touch this person. By touching him, Jesus exposed himself to the disease and made himself unclean for a day, and so he would have been unable to go to the temple to worship. It's the equivalent of our 14-day quarantine mandate in Ontario. Hey you, how are you? This is a girl who likes physical touch. We wrestle around and play and cuddle. And here is love. Jesus touches a person who makes him unclean. Are there untouchables in our community? Someone who may be starving for love because nobody else will touch them. Some even would have seen Jesus as a person to avoid. I actually visited a statue in Toronto, and I think there is maybe one in Hamilton too, of a homeless Jesus on a bench. Jesus was a man himself who had no place to call home. And in our day and age, he'd be sleeping on a bench unless someone invited him in. Who can you invite into your personal space, into your personal life? Now we are in a time right now where touch is discouraged and we're told to stay 2 meters apart. But what if someone needed a hug? I recently visited an elderly person with my kids, remember this? And we kept our distance from them, but then out of nowhere, this lovely person was desperate for a hug, and she lunged toward my children and just embraced them. And I said, "What are you doing? They could kill you." Her need for touch outweighed her need for potential physical harm. Or maybe she just forgot. Either way, it's a reality that the emotional and mental toll that is taken on a person from lack of physical touch is a reality. Whether this is our primary way that we speak love or not, we all need it in some capacity. Sadly, there are those in our community who people would not touch, even in the best circumstances. Some people have no intentional or purposeful or meaningful touch given to them. And as people, we crave it. Because when we think about each of these love languages, we all need some of each of them. But what does that look like? You know, sometimes flopping on the couch is like getting a big fabric hug, eh? For people in romantic relationships with a partner, we know we can give hugs, kisses, massage, and sexual activity are ways we know we can give and receive love and care in those committed relationships. This isn't my love language, so it's not my natural inclination towards these things, but Jen does speak this language. So if you have a partner who receives care and love through physical touch, it's important to do it. I actually have some reminders set in my phone to remember to touch Jen's face, give her a hug or a kiss. I'd been slacking on this, and the other day she said to me, "I need some physical attention." See, communication is so important. Just asking for what you need is pretty vital in relationships. This doesn't have to be sexual, but it can be. But what about those of us who are not in romantic relationships? What does this love language look like? Just Google friends love language, or how to share or how to show friends that you care using their love language. And you can get a myriad of ideas for the other 4 languages. Gifts, that's easy to give gifts to friends. Words of affirmation, why not? Quality time, of course. And acts of service, absolutely. But when it comes to touch, there's only one suggestion, which comes up again and again. Give a hug hello, and another when you say goodbye. Maybe an extra thrown in if they're feeling particularly low. But that's it. And while that may seem like enough, the reality is that these rushed, empty gestures just aren't meaningful and leave others feeling kind of limp-hearted. What if we treated the other love languages as casually with friends and family and colleagues? Just a few seconds of eye contact for some quality time. Give a superficial, meaningless item as a gift, not really caring for the reaction that it gets. Or giving a fraction of effort to help someone and then wander off before the job is completed. Or just regurgitate the same kind of empty phrase to every person in your life for some words of affirmation. Those would be the equivalent of physical touch that's offered in most non-romantic relationships. Throw-off expressions offered just kind of flippantly. So one potential obstacle to showing love this way is just our culture. North American culture is hyper-sexualized and yet utterly terrified of simple touch because of the possible harm or misunderstanding that can come from it. We fear if it's appropriate or how it's going to be seen. That's why we just ask. And people shouldn't be touching you without asking. In many cultures, friends walk arm in arm and kiss each other on the cheek with no hint of sexuality. But we need to know that people are okay with the ways that we are being touched. No one should be touching you without your permission. And so that's why it's important for us to communicate and ask those things. Touch is not always and often isn't sexual. Think about your friends, adult-child relationships, connections with coworkers and colleagues. How do we give and receive physical touch as a way to show care in these relationships? It's important to remember that physical touch is not just about being touched. It is about being touched in a way that demonstrates care, ideally by people that you care about. Obviously, receiving physical touch from someone you really love and care for fills you up. If you were to be touched by a stranger or a person that doesn't know you very well, it does not have the same effect and could probably have ill effects. Another potential obstacle is just our own past experience. See, if someone has experienced abuse in any physical or sexual way, they may be terrified of physical touch, even though they still crave it and need it to feel loved and to receive the psychological benefits of it. So between a fear of the past or the need for us in our culture to be hyper aware and not do anything that's inappropriate or perceived as inappropriate, it's important to know if and how a person wishes to be touched, and to do so in a meaningful way. I think we're starving for touch, more than we care to admit, and it's harming us as people. So what do you do if you are single or have friends who speak this language of physical touch? Well, think about touch as part of your existing non-romantic relationships. And what does that kind of look like? For those of us who give and show care through physical touch, there's an integral part of feeling rapport, care, and connection with anyone, whether they're friends or family or colleagues. And just as in romantic relationships, not having touch as part of these contexts means not recognizing or receiving the benefits. Oh, that's nice. I want to give you a couple things to try. Challenge the culture. In our own relationships where we work, live, and play, make space for each other in your own physical forms and honor each other. Some people may really appreciate a squeeze on the shoulder or the freedom to say, I really need a hug. Come up with a special handshake with a person you're friends with, even if you are not a physical touch person. Create an outlet for this. Build hobbies that offer physicality with others, like dance or acro yoga or a massage course. Well, this is maybe not as personal. Go for regular massages or go get your hair cut at a place that includes stuff like shampooing or a scalp massage. Encourage, support, and warmly receive hugs when you get them. Also, return the gesture with the other person's love language. So if a words of affirmation person hugs you, you could respond by saying, "You're a really good hugger." That's what I tell Isaac, my son, all the time. If he's comfortable to give you a hug, I highly recommend it. God has given that boy healing in his hugs. If someone you care about is a physical touch person, touch them in a way that they'd like to be touched. So just ask them, and do so warmly, gently, and deliberately. They will treasure it. They want real touch in the way words of affirmation people want a real compliment. These folks want thoughtful touch in the way gifts people want a thoughtful gift. They want a caring touch in the way that an acts of service person wants things taken care of. And they want attentive touch in the way quality time people want focus. They want a hug that lingers. They want someone to hold space for them. Here's the best news of all. The most meaningful of embraces comes from God. I had an experience once when I was very low emotionally. It was, I think, probably the beginning of clinical depression popping up in my life. And I remember sitting and crying and asking God to comfort me. And I felt a very distinct hand on my back, and a flood of calm just rushed into me. And it was this overwhelming sense that while I was experiencing this inner anguish, I was still going to be okay. God's embrace doesn't usually come in a physical way like that. I haven't experienced it that way since that one time. But I have experienced times that God fills me up and assures me at the core of my being that I belong. I would call that experience God's embrace, because touch is so much more than tactile sensation. It's a powerful way we know that we belong. Dr. Chapman says we need to be embraced for good, so for the benefit of goodness. When we need it most, and only God knows, God reveals himself and allows us to feel God love. In the Bible, there's a book written by Jeremiah. He's a prophet, and the people found themselves in a really desperate place. They were in the middle of a crisis and needed to feel God, to know deep down that he was with them. They were at the end of a losing war and are about to be captured and taken to a foreign land by their enemies. And while the circumstances around this defeat were very complex, one thing was very certain. The people who were looking to God needed to know they still belonged to God, and that God would be with them now and in their future captivity. And at their lowest point, they remember these words. The Lord appeared to us in the past, saying, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with an unfailing kindness. The word drawn here actually means led by embrace. They were always led by embrace through a kindness that never failed. And God makes it clear during this time of crisis that he would lead them into the future. Dr. Chapman says this is what it means to be embraced for good by God. It's like a hug from God at the very right moment. Some of us are in that moment right now. We feel the need to know God remembers us, is with us, and cares for us. I'm here to tell you, you belong. You are loved. God will not leave you. So look to him first for all things. Stop trying to find all the ways to numb the pain, because they all eventually run out and leave us high, dry, broken, and hurting more. God runs to us who need a hug most, and he is with you now with arms just wide open. And guess what? We can hug back. When we respond to God's presence, we hug back. It's called worship. We worship God through our work, our attitudes, our singing, how we treat others, how we spend our time and our money. Every aspect of our life can show response to God and how great God is. You belong. You matter. I hope God is stirring that in you right now, an overwhelming, can't be denied sense that you are loved, cared for, and worthy. Because only God can decide that. He has said it, and I believe it. I love you. You bear the image of God. So may you live out that love in practical ways, respectful ways, honoring ways that fills someone up with love in the ways they need, in the ways you need. Just ask and it will be given to you. All right, I'm gonna have to go show some physical love right now.